Hey, welcome back to another tutorial with Spring Boot. In this tutorial, we're going to create a MySQL database and use it in our application. So if you don't know, this is a video that is part of a series. We're building web applications with Java Spring Boot. And so here's the index of all the things that we're going to learn. So we are moving on to part 4, which is working with a database. So we're going to install a MySQL database and use that as our data source. My name is Shad Sluter, and I'm a professor of computer science and software development at Grand Canyon University. So please join the channel if you haven't already, and come to class with us as we build applications. So now it's time to look at the structure of our application again, and let's talk about the layers that are there. So at the top we have this request and response idea, and then in the layers we have services. So we're going to have a controller, and then we're going to have a business service, and then a data service at the bottom. Up until this point, we've been working with what's called a fake data application. So we've just put things into a list that are hard-coded into our application. What we're going to do now is we're going to replace that fake DAO with a MySQL database. And so this will actually look more like a real application. In a future video, we'll swap out the MySQL database and put in a MongoDB, and so you can see the differences. So the flow of execution is going to come from the controller through these various layers, and then the data layer will supply the data back to the top. And then, of course, the front end will determine how it looks. So here are some of the annotations that we've been looking at throughout this tutorial, and we're going to focus in on the top left corner here. You're going to see some more auto-wired and a repository, and we're going to have a couple of options now for our data service. So we have a 5-step plan ahead of us, and this is what the tutorial is going to cover. So step number 1, we're going to set up a database. So we'll install a SQL server, and we're going to use the MAMP application that will do this for us, and then we'll set up a table with some data, and you can see it here. Step 2, then, we're going to have to add some dependencies into our application. So we're going to include the JDBC application dependency, and then since we're working with a MySQL database, we'll include that dependency as you see it here. Step 3, we're going to have to tell the application how to connect to our database. And so in the application properties file, we're going to set up our username and password and all the different ports that our SQL server is running. Then in 4th step, we're going to create a data service that's actually going to have some statements in it that look like SQL statements. So this will be version 1 of our data service class. In the future videos, we'll show you how to shorten this even more than that you see here. Finally, in step 5, we're going to have to tell the application that we have a new guy in town. So the orders DAO is a bean that is managed, and there'll be 2 versions of this, and we have to tell it which one we're going to use today. All right, let's get started in the code here. I'm back in the editor. I'm going to copy and paste the previous project, and we're going to modify its properties. Okay, so let's right-click on the previous project and choose copy. I'm going to press Ctrl-V for a paste. I'm going to name this new project as topic 4-1. So we're moving into a new subject here. So find the main project file and we'll rename that as well. So I'm looking in com.shadsluter as my package, and then I'm going to rename the item that is called topic 3.3. Now I'm going to go into the POM file and do some editing there. So we're going to fix the topic name. So there's 2 places here. You should find topic 4.1 as the answer for what it should be the new name. And so fix both of these places and then save your changes. Then we're ready to move on and edit this project to include a MySQL database. Okay, now let's switch over to a browser. We're going to need a database if we're going to connect to it. So I'm going to be using the tool called MAMP. So the word MAMP stands for Macintosh, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. The only tool that we're going to use out of those 4 letters is the MySQL. So if you've already got MySQL installed through some other application, then you can use that. So I'm at the download page, and I'm going to be choosing the MAMP application, and I'm not going to install the pro version. The free version is just fine. So installing this is pretty much standard, so you can go through, and I'm not going to waste your time showing you how to install software. Let's go and take a look at the page up here at the top that says Web Start. So Web Start brings you to a page that is a local hosted application. You can see here. And what I'm interested in is the database that's behind it. So let's go to Tools and choose MyPH or PHP MyAdmin. And then you'll get into a control panel where we can set up a new database. Now you can see that on the left side here I've already got some databases that I've worked with from other projects. Let's create a brand new one for this project. So I'm going to choose the New button, and I think a good name for this database is called the Orders database, which is what we're making here, is an order service. So now that we got the database set up, let's go ahead and create a new table. This table is going to be called Orders, and by convention I use capital letters for all the table names and column names. So the table is going to have 5 new columns. So once we get the table created, we have to define those columns. So column number 1 is the ID value. That's always the first item that I pick for every table. And it has to be an auto increment. So scrolling over to the right, I see A_I. That doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. That is auto increment. And by default then, it automatically assigns it as a value of the primary key for this table. Then the next column is an order number. Now this could be the same value as the ID, but I'm going to make this a string. And so this is a good item for a varchar. And we can limit the characters to, let's say, 20. And this is completely an arbitrary decision about how long it should be. If you make something longer than 20, the database will not accept it. So the next item up is the product name. And once again, I'm using capital letters. And I'm going to use an underscore character because I doubt if spaces work very well in a table. Next up comes the price. So the price is going to be a decimal value. So you could use a float or a decimal. Either one of those will work fine. Finally, we have a quantity. So the order quantity will be an integer, and so we'll leave that as int. Now we're all done here, so let's go ahead and click the Save button, and we've got ourselves, hopefully, a valid table. Okay, now that we got the table set up, let's go ahead and check it out. I'm going to click Browse so that way we can see what's in it. And obviously it's an empty table. Nothing there yet. Now I'm going to insert some records. So let's go ahead to the menu called Insert, and then we're going to be able to fill out the fields. So the first one is the ID field, and we don't have to put anything there because of its auto increment. However, let's put in an order number. So this is a string up to 20 characters long. I'm going to just make up a number, and this is supposed to just be random. Then we're going to put in a description. So I'm going to call mine Easy Diet Pills. And let's give it a price. How about $950? And the order says we're going to get 1 of these. Once we got all this in, we'll go ahead and click the Save button. And you should see a green confirmation message that says 1 item has been inserted, and then you've got the SQL statement that was executed. You should see that on the screen next. Now let's go and check it out to see if it actually showed up. So I'm going to click on the Browse button, and you can see now that item ID number 1 indeed has all of the stuff in it that we just told it to. Now let's go to the Insert button and add some more. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to add some more products. So here's some cool inventions that we wish we could have. The first one is going to be a brain memory extender, and we'll give it a product number and a price. Then the next one I'm going to choose is a personality transplant. So I know some people that could probably use this. And then the third I'm going to create is a risk-free muscle steroid builder. So no workouts required, but man, do you look good. The next product, of course, should be Liquid Luck. And Liquid Luck, of course, is the best potion that you could ever have. Then the next one is One Absolutely Perfect Day. How much would you pay for that? Well, here's the price that I'm going to put on it. And how about this one? Let's do a hindsight vision from tomorrow. And I'm going to pick 4 of these because, man, it would be nice to redo that a few times. How about a persuasive charm? So some of you don't need to buy this. You've already got it. I could probably use some. How about the next one? Let's call it an instant college degree. Well, the closest you'll get to that is what you're doing right now. It takes time. And then 5 magic beans. Who knows what they're worth? They might be worthless. Who knows? Or you'll get a golden goose. And then 1 million likes. I've actually heard you can buy those if you can contract with the right companies. So maybe this isn't so ridiculous after all. And then finally, let's put in something, let's call it a regret remover. Anyone want to buy that? And so after I've set up all of these different items, let's go to the Browse button and admire all of the products and their ID numbers and their price and their quantities. So we should have some sample data that we can work with. Okay, now if we're going to use this database with our application, we need to get some dependencies. So I'm going to the dependency source, which is MVN repository, and we're going to start searching there for 2 different items. So the first item that I'm looking for is for mySQL. So I'm just going to search for the mySQL dependency. And the first item I get is the one that I'm looking for. It's the mySQL connector for Java. So let's open up this item, and then we're going to select the most current version. And then I'm going to get the Maven dependency, and then I'm going to copy it. So let's go ahead and select whatever's in the box here. Then I'm going to switch back into my application. So we're looking for the POM file, and once we open that up, we scroll down to where the dependencies are listed and insert this code. So make sure it's inside of the bracket where the dependencies start. So let's indent it, and we've got ourselves the first dependency for working with mySQL. Now we're going to need another dependency, so let's switch back into the Maven repositories. This time I'm looking for a Spring Boot starter for JDBC. And JDBC, by the way, stands for Java Database Connector. Now I'm going to pick the second one here, which is called Spring Boot Starter Data, JDBC. So I know this is the right one just because of previous experience, but I'm not quite sure what the differences are between these two. Maybe you can research that and tell me. Well, I'm going to copy the dependency code and switch back into the POM file. I'll paste the new dependency code into the POM file and indent, and hopefully everything works fine. So now I'm going to swipe over to where MAMP is running. Now let's check out the properties here. I want to get the port number for what this server is running on. So in the properties, you can see the area called ports. And in my case, I'm running on port 8889. Now yours might be different. It doesn't have to be this number, but you do have to know the number so that your application connects to it properly. So 8889 is the number I'm looking for. So now I'm back into the application, and I am looking for a file called Application Properties. You'll find it in the folder called Resources. So open up Application Properties, and you'll see that it is just a blank file. Okay, so let's start to fill in these details for our connection. So first of all, a comment to say what we're trying to do here. So this is a mySQL connection to the MAMP application. Now I'm going to start by typing the word spring, and you can see it's kind of slow. The type ahead is getting there. It's helping me out, but I should be able to eventually see this because of the dependencies I just installed. So spring.dataSource is the first item. Give it the URL. Now the URL is kind of a strange format, but it goes like this: JDBC : MySQL, another colon, and then the URL. So // localhost. Make sure you get the port number, which in this case was 88889, and then a slash with the database name. So if you recall, I used ordersDB as the name. If you used a different name for your database, then use that here. The second item that I'm going to tell it in the connection is this data source username. So in MAMP, the default username is root. And so is the password. So root. I am root. Now, why would we use root? It's what's default, but it's not a good idea to use that in a real application. I should have gone into the database management system, created a specific login name for this app, and then set that up. In this case, I'm just choosing to do a shortcut. So root and root. In a real production database, don't do this. Now the next item is the connection called the driver class name. And so we get some type ahead help here. When I start typing, I get com and then MySQL, and then the rest of it I'm going to allow it to type it in for me because I would probably do it wrong if I tried to type it one letter at a time. So com, SQL, CJ, and then JDBC driver. So I think CJ is kind of a newer version of this. If you might see tutorials that have without this string CJ in it. So now I've got 4 different items, which tells me the data source, username, password, and then the connection that I'm going to make. Okay, so all of that set up the database and the connection to go with it. Now let's go back into our program and start creating a new service. So let's take a peek inside of the folder called data. And you can see that I have a fake DAO already set up. And we're going to now supersede this. We're going to have a better version because in this case, it was just a bunch of hard-coded text. Now we're going to actually connect to the database, but we're going to use the same methods. Now remember, the methods that we determined have to go in here come from the interface. So let's open up the interface first and review what we need to create. So in this case, we have I think it's 6. We have 6 items that are going to handle all of the orders. So we've got get by ID, get orders, get them all, search and get or add one and delete one and then update one. So we've got some coding ahead of us here. We're going to have to write SQL statements to talk to our SQL database, and we'll implement all of these different actions. So let's add this new service now. I'm going into the data container or the package and right click, choose new, make a class, and let's name this thing as the order data service. Now we could tell it to implement an interface here, but we'll save that for the next step. So once you have that done on the screen, you should see an empty class. First up on the list is I want to tell Spring that this is a managed bean. So I have to have an annotation to tell it what kind, and this is acting as a repository. So a repository is the idea of giving data with a bunch of methods, which is exactly what we're doing. Next step is to tell it where these patterns are coming from. So I'm going to say this implements the orders data access interface. And if I spelled it right, I will get a message that says you have a problem. So orders data service now has a red underline. So the computer's angry at me and gives me a suggestion. One item is to say add the unimplemented methods. Let's try that. And we should see all of those 6 items that we just looked at in the interface now appear. And we have to implement these using some code that's SQL code, and it will talk to the database. Now we're going to need some help here because we have to have a connection to our database. And the way we do that is by creating an instance of a class called data source. So use a capital D and source, and then an instance name. You can call it anything you want, but data source with a lowercase d, it makes sense to me. So this will be connected through the properties we just defined in our application properties. So this has to be injected, so we're going to use the auto-wired annotation just before the name of the class. Next up, I'm going to introduce something we've never seen before, probably. It's called the JDBC template. And we're going to make a new instance of this as well. Let's put auto-wired on top of it so we can make sure that it gets injected properly. So you probably have no idea what JDBC template means, so let's go and Google it. And we're going to find ourselves on the Spring docs. So what's it say? What's it for? So it says this is central to the JDBC package. It simplifies the use of Java database connections and helps to avoid common errors. So far, so good. So let's scroll down a little further and see what's ahead of us and what we're going to be using. So there are a ton of methods using this. So the most interesting ones that we're going to find start with the word query. So you can see that query has a lot of different versions, and they deal with prepared statements, which allows us to avoid SQL injection attacks. That's another whole subject, but you can see my tutorials on security and about SQL injection attacks and how to avoid that. The answer is you need prepared statements. So we're going to be demonstrating that here. So there's a lot of different queries where we have queries that are for objects, and we have a string that has to be put in. And so just let you know that we're going to be using these methods. And if you have questions about which ones are available and some of the specifics about which parameters to use, that's what the documentation is here for. So this page right here is where I'm getting my information from. Okay, let's get back into the code. So this JDBC template is going to be used throughout our SQL statements to be able to execute those lines. So in order to be able to connect our object, which is called order model, to the table, which has different properties, we're going to have to make a new class called a row mapper. All right, so to create this row mapper, we're going to create a new class, and let's choose the models folder to put it in. So right-click on models and choose create new class. The class name is going to be called the orders mapper because we're going to map the table name to the properties of the order model. Now we're going to implement an interface here. So go ahead and choose add an interface, and I'm searching for row mapper. Make sure that you get the right one because it looks like there's 2 of them. So I'm looking for the one that comes from the JDBC library. Go ahead and choose OK. Now we've got ourselves a few problems here, and we're going to resolve these one at a time. So first of all, we got row mapper as my implementation, and we got this letter T. Now T is for a type. It's a generic in Java. So I could use generics, but I'm going to make this a little simpler because you might not be familiar with those. So let's go ahead and put in here the type of thing that I'm expecting to work with. So in this specific case, the orders mapper is for the orders model. So go ahead and change T into order model. Now go to the order mapper and choose something to implement the unimplemented methods of this class. So what do we get? We get a map row function, or this method. And there's two things that it's going to work with. One, it's going to do a result set, which is the data that comes from the database, and then a row number. Now what we're going to do is return an order model. So we're going to take something that comes from the database and interpret it into a model. Now let's compare two things side by side. First of all, let's go and look at the order model and the properties. So we have these properties, as you can see, listed. We have an ID, an order number, a product name, price, and quantity. It matches kind of close to the database. So let's drag over the database into this window and see what kind of columns we have here. So we have ID, capitalized, order number, product name, price, and QTY. So putting these things side by side, we have kind of a match, right? So ID matches with ID, order number with this. They're not spelled the same. So this class is going to build the bridge between these, what the database says and what the class name has for properties. So let's map out the recipe that we're trying to do here. So first of all, we're going to have to get the result set, and then we're going to fetch those objects that come from the columns. So then we're going to create a new order object, and we're going to use all the properties of the constructor to match up with the column names in the database, and then finally return it. So that's our goal here. So let's type out the first bit of code that makes sense to us. So create a new order, and it's of type order model. And then we're going to return it. So inside the constructor, though, is where the details happen. So you can see right now that if I were to take a look at this order model, the constructor doesn't work. It says you've got a bunch of properties that you need to provide me, and then I can make you an order. So let's go ahead and select the first item, which says, give me those properties. So we've got a null, 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 and then a couple of numbers here. So it made its best guess at what would make this constructor work, and obviously has nothing to do with what it should be. But we can guess what these are. So to get the ID for this object, I'm going to get it from the ID column from the database. So let's type in rs, which stands for result set, .getAlong. Remember, along is the type of data for our ID number. And we're going to get it from column ID. So putting in quotation marks, the column name. Now the next item in my database is a string. It's called the order number. And so this is going to be using rs.getString and put in the column name here, order number. Now let's go down to the rest of the columns here. So the next one up is a string, which is the product name. And so fetch the column name exactly as the spelling is, otherwise we'll cause an error. Then we're going to have the price, which is a float. So a decimal number or a float number, they work the same. And then finally we have an integer at the last property, which is for the quantity. So quantity in the database was spelled QTY. So just to make sure that I spelled everything right, I'm going to drag in my database screen here and put it right below the constructor so that I have all the matches in front of me. So ID matches ID, order number with the underscore matches the column table, and then the product name, and then we got price and QTY for the quantity. So this mapping here, if it's spelled correctly, will work flawlessly. Okay, so I think I got all the results here that I'm looking for, so I'm going to take out the comments and just clean up the page. So I'm going to save this and close it because I don't believe we're going to have to come back and look at the order mapper anymore. Okay, next up, we're going back into this file here called the orders data service. So let's go ahead and start implementing these methods. So I think the first and the easiest one is the second one on the list, which is called get orders. It's supposed to get something from the database, which is a list, and then return them. Okay, let's get started with this thing called the JDBC template. So I'm going to put in .query as the method. Now, there's lots of different queries, and it doesn't really matter which one you pick, but for helpful hints, I'm going to slide down until I come to one that says, I'm going to expect to have a SQL statement as my first parameter, and the second one is some kind of an object mapper. So let's go ahead and select that one. And I'm going to get the same results no matter which item I pick, but the hint will change. So I have two parameters and they're both marked as null. But look at the tiny, tiny print there. And it says, I'm expecting to see a SQL statement first. So we're going to have a string here that says select a bunch of stuff. And then the second item, which is an object mapper or the orders mapper, which is going to tell us what kind of a translation we're going to expect. So the first statement, I think I can guess. It's supposed to get all of the orders. Let's do a select star from the orders table. And just for default, I'm using all capital letters. Now for the second parameter, I'm going to give a new instance of our orders mapper. So this will return the proper object, hopefully. Now this isn't worth much unless we actually do something with it. So this statement will send back a bunch of data, and we're going to capture it into a list. So this will be a list of type order model, and let's call our list results. The final step before we move on is to return those results. So as we promised in the property of the return type, it's a list of order model. So results will be sent up to the next level, which is our business service. All right, so now look down the ways. We've got a bunch of code left to right here. So this is incomplete, but we should be able to get the orders that we want if we can run our application. So I'm going to just try and run the app and see how it runs and see if there's any errors. So I look down at the bottom here and it looks like there's no errors, which is good. That's a good start. Let's go ahead and try it in our browser though and see what happens when we try to get all of the orders. All right, so let's bring up a browser and go for our local host and let's do 8080 and then let's choose orders afterwards. So what happens when I type in orders? And rats, I didn't get everything I wanted to. So what's the matter here? What did I do wrong? Let's see if we can interpret the error message and fix it. So the first part, it says here, you have an unsatisfied dependency expressed through something called orders DAO. It's got a problem. It says you were expecting a single matching bean, but found two. So here's our conflict. This item that I've just got highlighted here. Can you identify the problem? And better yet, can you give me a solution? So it says here, we have an orders fake DAO, and we also have an orders data service. And it says here that they're both implementing the orders data access interface. And Spring is saying, I'll take one of these two, but you got to tell me which one it is. So let's go see if we can find out where that problem occurs. So that occurs down here in the business service. So let's go to the business folder or the services folder, and let's go find the orders business service right here. Okay, so this line here is what's causing the error. It says we've got this thing called an orders service, an orders DAO, and now you've got two guys in the project that are both implementing this interface. And you find them over here in the data folder. So we've got orders data service, and we have the orders fake DAO. And if we check on that, sure enough, they're going to have this thing called implements. And then the other one also says implements. Let's check the top. Yep, there it is. So they both implement this thing. Okay, now what do you do if you want to pick one over the other? Well, as you recall, maybe from previous lessons, there's a couple of ways to do it. Let's pick the first way, which is the simplest. And we could just put in here at the top where it says repository, I can put in the word as primary. And let's see, I have to import this annotation. And this is going to say, hey, Spring, this guy is my choice. So I could save it and run it. That would work. However, I want to delete this and show you another method that is just as valid. So now I'm going to go to the file called Spring config. And hopefully this rings a bell. This is from a previous tutorial. I have a bean that is indicated as which one is first. So I'm going to copy and paste this as my example, and the order DAO is what I'm looking for. Now this doesn't have any kind of init or destroy methods, so I can just delete that part of it. Now the other two items that we're going to have to change are the type of interface that I'm dealing with here, which is the orders data access interface. And then we need some kind of a method name to be able to say get the data service is a good name for it. And then we're going to return which class is the current one in favor. And so the current one in favor with me right now is the orders data service instead of the orders fake DAO. All right, so that is the second way. You can see that the advantage here is that if you want to know which beans are being currently used, it's all in one file. However, it's more code. If you put primary above another database access service, that will work just as well. Okay, so theoretically, we're ready to go. So I'm going to restart the app, and then I'm going to run the web page to see what kind of things show up. Hopefully, no more errors. Okay, we're back to this page that had this white label error. I'm going to refresh it and hope. Oh, wow. Look at here. I actually have something. It says easy diet pills and all the way down and to the regret remover. Not bad. Let's go and check out the API and see if that works as well. So I'm going to remove the word orders and change it to API/v1/orders. And sure enough, I get the JSON formatted data. So both controllers are using the new data service, which is from the MySQL database. Hooray! Now we've got a problem though, because if I try to get a specific number, such as give me order number 2, and I press enter, I get nothing. So why am I not getting anything? It's because the data service isn't yet programmed. Let's fix that next. So now we're going to do the finishing touches on the order data service. So we've done only one operation right now, which is get orders. We still have 5 more to go. So get by ID and search and add and delete, and then finally we've got update. So we're going to go through these in not in the order that they're listed, but in the order that I think will help you understand it the best. So I'm going to select this item here, which is add one. So I'm going to choose JDBC template again, and then select the update method. So update will give us an insert or an update method like for the edit operation. Now the parameters that I'm choosing are going to be this one here, where it's going to say give me a SQL statement and then also an object. So let's go ahead and select that, and that way we get the right hints. So first of all, the select statement. So what's that supposed to be? So the pattern that we use for writing a SQL statement for inserting is this: insert into the table name and then a parentheses, and then we're going to say values and another parentheses. Now inside these sets of parentheses are going to be the column numbers or the column header names plus the values. So let's go write down the column header names. We're going to skip the ID because that is an auto increment, but we'll start then with the order number and then the product name, price, and then QTY. To follow up with that, we have to put in the values. Now these values we're going to use question mark placeholders. And so the reason we do that is to avoid SQL injection attacks. Let's go ahead and finish this up now with some other follow-up statement. So for each of these follow-up question marks, we're going to have to put in a property. So the first question mark should match with the new order object called getOrderNumber. And then the next, of course, is going to be using the getter for the get product name. And then we go through price and quantity. Make sure that we get all the syntax and the semicolons in place, and the text editor now turns back into a nice beautiful green and blue color. Lastly, we're going to catch that result value, and when we do, we return it as part of the return of this method. So if we save these changes and run the application, we should be able to add a new item. So I'm going to switch back into Postman. So if you haven't looked at Postman, you got to go back a tutorial or so, and we got this item here called add order. So in the previous example, we said we want to add this record, and it's supposed to be a new item, which is ID. So let's go ahead and send it and see what happens. As you can see, it didn't work so well. Let's go check the error message because this sometimes happens. It says, what did you do? You have a bad SQL statement. And it says down here that pricey is probably not the column that you're looking for. So let's go back into the code and say, what in the world were you thinking? Why did you say pricey when it should be price? Let's go ahead and save the results. So now let's return here and let's try to do a send again. And this time we get a number 1. So it looks like it's returning a value as true, like it was a successful update. So I'm actually disappointed in what I got. The result value here is returning the number of rows that are affected, which is always 1 if there's a successful insert. What I want instead is to return the value of the ID number that was inserted into the database. So how do I get that? So the answer lies in another insert method. So if you were to search Google for simple JDBC insert, you're going to come to the Spring Docs as your first choice. And they have a nice tutorial page that gives you an example of what to look at. So we're going to take something that looks like this here. We're going to create a insert method or a simple insert class and make an instance of it. Then we're going to have to create a hash map that shows all the parameters. And then when we're finally done, it will give us a return value of the number we're looking for. So to make this happen, I'm going to comment all of this out for a moment and then replace it. So the first step here is to create an instance of this new object here. It's called simple JDBC insert. Make sure you get the capitalization right. Name it anything you want, like simple insert. And when we create a new instance of it, notice that it uses our JDBC template as one of the parameters. So now we're going to run a statement that'll tell it what table and what column are important here. So we'll do simple insert dot and say with table name, and we'll have to provide this with the orders table. Following that, we have the option to say, put another dot and to say using the column that is our key values, our primary key. And the one that we're choosing is a generated key column because of auto increment. So we'll choose using generated key columns and say the ID number. Now part 2 of this is to create a hash map. So we need to tell it what all of the different parameters are coming in here. So let's create a map object. The first piece of the map is a string, the second is an object, and we'll name it parameters. And so just initiate a new hash map. Now to put these parameters in, we're going to do parameters.put is our command, and the first item that we put is a string. So this is the column name for our table. So I'm going to copy the order number from the previous code that I had written, order number with the underscore. Then I have to give it a value. And let's go to newOrder.getOrderNumber, and so I can copy that from above too. So let's finish this off with the other 3 properties. So we'll copy and paste a few times. The next item, of course, is product name, and so I'll copy that so I don't misspell it. And then we're going to get the property from the new order object. Price is up next, so copy price and then put in get price. And then finally QTY is for the quantity. Now I'm going to go to the execute command. So simple insert.exe. Let's look at all these different options that I can execute with. So the one that I'm looking for is, I think it's the third one down that says execute and return a key. So this is the ID number that comes out of the mySQL database. So it says provide me with a map. Of course, I've got that map already defined. And then it says it's going to return a number. So it doesn't return a long value. It doesn't return an integer, but it does return a number. So the number class is a wrapper for all kinds of other numbers. So we'll take a look at what that means in a second. But I'm just going to select this one here. And now it says, provide me with some parameters, and it's defined them already and correctly guessed that that's what I want to put in there. So now we need to capture the value that comes back from this execution statement. So my first instinct is just to say, give me a long value from here. And as you can see, that doesn't work. If I say this, what's the problem? It's going to say you have 2 choices. You can cast a number to a long, which actually doesn't work, but you can change the type of result to number. Let's do that. So number is the class, and we can get various results from it. So let's just see if I can return it. And of course, it doesn't work, right? So what's the problem? It says, same issue. You have a number class, and the definition of your function here says you're going to return a long value. So we can get this value, no problem. We just come back to result and then type in the word get long value, I think it is. Let's see, if I put in there, it's long. There we go. So it's long value. All right, let's switch back into Postman, and I'm going to the add order command. Looks like the last time I did it, I was trying to insert something and go to the moon. So let's go ahead and send this. This time when it comes back, notice the number here at the bottom is 18. So I have inserted an item and the new identity is 18, which is good because now in my application, I might need to know that this is now the new ID number. Now, are we pretty sure that that got in there? Let's go ahead and check the orders. So I'm going to choose Get All Orders and choose Ascend. And to see if there's anything at the bottom, it certainly looks like it. Orbit the moon. It shows on these results anyway. Let's go and check to see if it actually inserted. So I'm going to bring in the administration tool and click the Browse button to refresh it and see what happened. So it looks like here, down here in item number 13, we've got Orbit the Moon twice again, and it appears that we have it in our database. Way to go. So now let's move to the top of the list and let's tackle the first one, which is Get Order by ID. So we'll use the same pattern we did before. We say JDBC template dot query. We'll put in a query string followed by some other parameters. So to get one item, we do a select statement that looks like this. We say select star from orders where the ID equals a value, and we'll put in a question mark as a placeholder. The second parameter is going to be the orders mapper, so that way we can convert these. And then the third parameter is going to replace the question mark, which in this case is the ID value that came in from the parameter as a long. Now I want to save these results, so I'm expecting to get an order, right? An order model. So I put in order model and we'll call it results, and it equals to this. Now we get a red underline. So problems here. What doesn't work? Let's hover and see if we can get a clue. It says here that this is supposed to return a list of orders. So the query is selecting multiple items. So instead of doing a single item, it's returning a whole bunch of them. So I can fix that. I can just say, well, instead of the return type to be a single order model, let's expect an entire list. So we'll surround that order model with a list. The last step then, of course, is to return it. So let's go ahead and return the results. Now we got a problem. It says here that order model is expected to be a single object and you sent me an entire list. Which do you want it to be? We could just return the first item. So let's put in a get and say the first item in the list is item number 0. Now this will work as long as there is a match found. However, if there is no match found, this will be a null and your computer pro will crash because, well, there'll be an index out of bounds range here. So to avoid an error, let's go ahead and check to see if the results list has got some items in it. So we can check with an if statement to say if the results period size is greater than 0, that means we got at least one result, and we should actually have just one. We'll return that result. Otherwise, we're going to get a null value, and we'll send that back. Okay, so I think that's worth testing. I'm going to save the changes and bring back our tester. So here comes Postman. We're going to do the test again. And in the past, we had an item that was get all orders. Let's go ahead and do a new search. So I have a request here, and I set it up here to look for a single item. It's a get request, and it says do the orders and pick a number such as 2. When I push send, I do get number 2. What happens if I send something like 5? And now I get the 5th order. What happens if I do 55 and choose send? We get a 1 back, which means nothing apparently. It didn't return any valid results. So that looks to me like we got the get by ID working. All right, let's try to attempt the search function now. So in the search function, we're going to have the same kind of a pattern. We're going to expect a bunch of results, and then we're going to return them. So let's use our JDBC template again, run a query, and the first parameter in the query is the SQL string. So for this one, we'll do select star from the orders table where the product name is like a question mark. Then we'll put in the second parameter, which is the orders mapper, same as before. And now the third term is a string. In this case, we're going to have some wildcard characters. So I'm going to attempt to put 3 things together with concatenation. So we'll do a %sign plus the search term followed by a %sign. So that means a wildcard in before the search term as well as after, which will allow us to search for partial names. Then finally we do the return statement to give the results back to the next layer up. All right, let's go ahead and save it and do the test again. So here we go, we're back to Postman. I'm going to bring up the search orders, and in this case we can do the search for some character. Let's put in the letter A and choose send. So it looks to me like we got something. So we got easy as a match, and it looks like we have an A in there. So let's try a little bit more. Let's put in the word day and see if we get a day. So now we get a single. I'm going to put in the word luck, and sure enough we get liquid luck. I'm going to search for a little more broadly, so I'll put in ST, and it looks to me like we've got 2 matches. So it appears that the search is working like we want it to. Now let's move down to the delete command. So we'll do a delete one, and this is expecting a number as an ID number. So we'll do a JDBC template command, and we're going to select update. Strange as it may seem, update will work here. So update, we're going to put in the SQL statement to say delete from orders where the ID equals the question mark. And then we have to supply whatever value the question mark is next. So it's the ID parameter. No, we don't have to put in any kind of a mapper here because we're not retrieving any data. We're just deleting data. Now the result's going to come back as an integer. So let's go ahead and save it as an integer result, and we'll check to see if it's greater than 0. That means we had a successful delete, and we'll send back a true. And if it was an unsuccessful delete, we'll return a false. Okay, so to test this, let's go check the controller to make sure we understand how this is going to work. So I'm going to open up the REST controller and look for the orders delete command. So sure enough, down here, it says we're using a get mapping, and we're expecting to get a number in the URL, and then we'll delete it. Okay, let's see how that works. So we're using a get mapping to perform a delete. So here we go. This is the postman. Let's go ahead and add a new request. Let's leave it as get, but we'll call this thing delete one. Now let's put in the URL. So we're going to put in the URL with orders/delete and then the number 2. Go ahead, and that should delete record number 2, and we got a true as a result. So is 2 in the database? Let's go find out. Let's go get all the orders, and let's see if we can find number 2. So we've got ID 1 here, and then it jumps to 3. So it looks like it was deleted. All right, switching back, let's go down and look at the update. That's the last item we have to program. So let's start with the JDBC update command, and we'll put in a string. So what's your knowledge of SQL, and how do you perform an update command? Here goes. So I'm going to type in update orders, and then you say set, and you tell it each column name and a value. So order number, and we'll use a question mark for a placeholder. The next column is product name. The next one is price. Third one is QTY. And then we have to tell it where the condition is true. So where an ID number matches something. So now we've got all these question marks. We have to make sure that we match them with the parameters that were sent to us. So what was sent to us? Well, we have a ID to update number, and then we have an order that is the new record. So this one here, the ID to update, will match up with the last question mark. The rest of these will all match properties for the update order. So let's go ahead and fill in the rest of these. So we're going to say the parameter for the first question mark is the order number. So we'll take the object called order to or update order, and we'll do the getter on the order number. The second question mark matches the product name, so we use the getter on the value, and then we'll do the get price as the next getter, and then finally we'll do the get quantity. Now the last question mark is the ID number that we're trying to match. And that one is the first parameter that was sent to us, called ID to update. So that's a long. Now the return value from an update command is the number of records that was changed. So that is an integer. We'll call that result. So now for the return, we're going to have to return an object. So if the result value is greater than 0, that means that there was at least one row updated, or probably exactly one row. And so let's return the updated record. Then if it is false, if it is not greater than 0, then let's return a null value. So update record doesn't make any sense, does it? It's supposed to be update order, and that looks better. I think we're ready to save it, and let's try it out. All right, so we're going to use Postman to try to do an update on a record. So first of all, I'm going to get all orders and choose send, and let's pick one. So here is ID number 3. That one looks pretty good. So I'm going to highlight it and copy it. Now earlier I had created a new put statement, it looks like. So this was a new request, which I'm going to call update. And so then I'm going to use the body of the request as my new item. So let's see, whatever was in there is gone, and I'm pasting in ID 3. So we're going to say the personality transplant, and I don't know, let's raise the price. So let's make it a 9 in front of there. And let's put in a new record such as 12. We'll keep the ID the same. So let's put in a 3 up here at the top. So we're going to update record 3 using a put request, and this is the body of my request. Let's see, that comma doesn't work, and let's try and send it. Okay, what did we get? We got ourselves a reply that says this is the record. So if it failed, we would have gotten like a null value, but instead I've got this record. So let's see if this is actually what's in the database. Let's go ahead and choose get orders and send it. And let's look for number 3. And sure enough, 3 shows the changes that we made. So I believe the update command is working as well. Okay, so switching back here, it looks to me like I have update 1, there's a delete 1, add 1, get the orders, and ID. So that's all 6 operations. We've got ourselves a database that's connected to our service, and we're ready to roll. So I'm going to switch back into my browser just to see if this is working anymore. So this was to try to get order number 2, and let's see what happens. Oh, that's right, we deleted 2. Let's try 3, and 3 comes out now. So it looks to me like the browser is doing the same thing as Postman. Now, what about the rest of the stuff? Where is the delete command? Where is the update? Where is the search? We haven't created any of those yet. There are no time leaf pages to work that way. So if you haven't already created them, that's kind of a challenge. Let's see if you can finish that off. And if you can't, then would I give you a video? Maybe I will. I'll show you how to create all those things. But it would be a great homework assignment to see if you could create the forms and operate with all of the operations, so the entire CRUD app using time leaf pages. So hooray, we did it. Look at the design that we created. So this entire thing was built earlier with a fake database, and we have moved it out of the way, and now we have mySQL running. So it looks to me like the request can come down from the client and return to the client. So in other upcoming videos, we're going to create more features. We're going to replace the mySQL database with a Mongo database. We're going to show you how to work with shorter statements instead of using the template format that we did here. So more to come using Spring Boot.